What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TWA Motorsports, and today, you guessed it, we are working on the LS motor that I took out of my Trans Am. I do have the heads back. I've got the head bolts. That's right, I'm going to be using head bolts, not studs. No real purpose in using studs. But before we start assembling this, we need to chase the threads. Now, I talked about in the last video, I did have something to chase these. I used an old head bolt, and it's actually the same size as my ZR1. Now, the downside is I made a thread chaser for my ZR1. Those holes are bigger, so I ended up buying the ARP thread chaser. It's kind of pricey, but it's going to do a better job than, you know, a notched stock head bolt. Like I said, it's kind of pricey. I will list this in the description down below if you want to get this. Now, it is different, obviously, for the ZR1 because they are different head bolts. This will fit all LS stuff besides the LS9 because it uses a thicker head stud. But let's get started by doing that. I also have my lifters. I chose to do an LS7 lifter. I will also list that down below. But there's a controversy on whether you should soak your lifters and whether you should not. Now, if you soak the lifters for too long, it does mess with setting of the preload. I'm not really concerned about that. I set, or I let them set in there just until the bubbles came out. I just wanted to give them a good coating from out of the package because they were completely dry. Some people install them dry. That is completely your preference. I'm going to try to show you how to set the preload on the lifter. That's why I did not let them set overnight. But let's get started with chasing these threads. Once we get that finished, we will pull out all of this. We will get the lifters and the new cups into place, which I did buy new cups. I'll show you that when we get to that section. But let's get started chasing these threads. Now, one thing when you're doing this, guys, be very careful not to cross-thread it. The last thing you want to do is mess up the threads in the block. If it gives you too much resistance, stop, back up, and start over, okay? But we're going to just lightly tap, or not tap, but chase these threads, getting all the junk out of it because there is a ton of stuff generally in these threads. I don't know. It doesn't seem like GM uses a Loctite or anything on these. It's just, I don't know, it seems like there is stuff in the threads. So we're going to go down each one of these, which will take just a hair over forever, but we may do it a couple times. I'm not real sure. Once you get to the bottom, of course, back it out. But we're gonna go, this is gonna be a long time lapse probably. Now, of course, after each one of these, I'm going to use my little tool that I made with the straw to suck out anything that might have fallen back down. But I'm not going to show you guys this process because, well, it's boring and it's going to take forever. So we want to get to the meat and potatoes, which is putting this all together. So let's skip to that. I just wanted to show you guys how much stuff comes out when you're chasing the threads. So I'm vacuuming this off after each one. So this is a good deal. You need to make sure that you're chasing the threads to get all this out. Otherwise, your torque specs on your new parts are not going to be right. So guys, it's a couple days later, and I just ran out of time and got tired, decided to go in, was done for the evening. But we have the bolt holes all cleaned out. So all of them, I have ran that chaser down each one of these a couple times. And you could see in that part that it does pull a ton of stuff out. But now we're ready to put the lifters in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this plate off the top, the motor plate, and we'll obviously be reusing that. But I just, while I'm mounting the heads, I don't want to run into any problems with this being in the way. So we're going to go ahead and get it out of the way. Chances are it won't be in the way, but I'd like to get it out of the way just so I have some more room to move around. So I'm going to pull out these towels. I'm going to vacuum out, wipe out each one of these individual pieces, and then we will be installing new lifter cups, which I have here, the lifter trays, and we will be putting the bolts back in. Obviously, we're going to be putting the lifters in as well, and like I said, I did let them dip in oil just for a little bit, and I am going to set the preload, so don't worry about that causing an issue. I didn't let them soak overnight, but I did stick them in there, and I'm also going to use a little bit of assembly lube, which you will see just on the rollers. You know, I don't know, I just like to have as much lubrication as possible because this motor is going to be, I don't know, maybe a month or so away from firing up. So let's go ahead and grab these, get get the plate off, take all the towels out, clean this up, and after I pull these out, I'm also going to go ahead and vacuum each one of these holes one more time just to make sure we did get everything, and then we can start that assembly process. Now I'm also going to wipe this surface off one more time. I don't really think it needs it, but just in case, try to get it as clean as possible. And I'm just using some carb cleaner, so not a big deal. But I think we are good. So let's grab couple of those lifter trays, which I will list those parts in the description down below, as well as I'm going with an LS7 lifter, and I'm not going with the cheapo LS7 lifter, but I will list the part number down below. It's really kind of one of those things where if you look online like eBay, they sell the cheaper ones, and I went with the more expensive one. There's actually two different sets, and you'll also see that like on Texas Speed's website and whatnot, but I went with the more expensive set. It just seems like people have had better luck with those. So let me grab a couple of those, actually 4 of them, and we will get some assembly lube on them and get them into place. Now, like I said, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on these, maybe roll them around a little bit. But one thing you will notice that if you reuse your old lifter trays, which a lot of people do, and I've done in the past, it's not a huge deal, but they're way looser. You can definitely tell a difference between new ones and your old junky ones, because these lifters tend to just fall right out of place if you reuse your old ones. So let's slide this into place. A little bit of assembly lube along the sides too. Now we just got to do it, obviously, 3 more times. Once we got those into place, you kind of wiggle them back and forth and they'll work their way down in there. Just way easier in my opinion than putting the lifters in and then trying to spin around and then put the trays in. So we're ready to put the bolts in. So the next thing I'm going to do, now the manual does not really call for thread locker, but I'm just using some blue thread locker on these, and just a little bit, not a ton. And these get torqued to depending on which motor you have. Now, I don't know if they're basing the torque specs off the lifter trays. So if they are, 89 inch-pounds is the newer style Gen 4 block. The old torque specs are 106. So I'm going to go to 106. And you don't want to go any more than that because it's really, really easy to strip these. They're really fine threads, and you're really not going into much. So do not go any more than 106 inch-pounds. I don't think you're going to cause any issues. If it sounds like the lifter tray is cracking, I don't think that it will. But if it does, obviously, you're going to have to replace it. But like I said, we're going to go with 106 inch-pounds, which isn't super tight. That's as tight as those bolts are that come in from the pan. As you can see, not a whole lot there. I'm going to double check. Yep. And we'll go and do the other side. And honestly, guys, this is pretty easy parts here. Once we get these into place and all torqued down, we only got these two left, we're going to go ahead and set the head into place, which obviously the head's kind of heavy. It's not really that it's that heavy, but it's just awkward, and you know, it is heavier than most of the stuff you're dealing with. So I'm going to get those heads out of the box. I'm going to grab my my head gaskets and lay them into place, as well as your dowel pins. Now, I did accidentally send two of my old dowel pins with the heads, the stock heads, because I sold them. And so I had to go buy two new dowel pins, which I will list that part in the description as well. But some people say you don't need them. I like them for alignment purposes, so I'm going to be using them. And well, let me go get these heads blown off and get the head gasket into place. I'm also going with a LS9 head gasket. I know that it is not made for a 5.7, and it's going to leave a little bit between cylinders because it doesn't have the same bore, but everybody has used them from 5.3s all the way through 6.2s and seemed to have great luck with it. And because I thought I might do some boost down the road, I thought it would be a better option. So you can go back with a different option, and obviously there's a ton of different head gasket options out there. That is just what I'm choosing to go with. So like I said, I'm going to go grab those heads, blow them off, making sure there's no burrs on them, and we'll get those into place. All right, guys, I went ahead and tapped the dowel pins into place, and you want to make sure that they are seated properly. You don't want to be getting them off when you're trying to get this all tight. And before I put the head gasket into place, I am going to one more time clean this deck surface just in case anything fell on it. Obviously, if you have anything in the bores, you want to get that out, because obviously once we get the head on, we are not going to be able to see any of this stuff. So let me grab the head gasket now. I'm using a microfiber, obviously, because I don't want any lint off a towel to get in between and cause any mating issues. But we are ready to put the head gasket into place. Now, if you notice, like I said, this is not really meant for this motor, but we are going to be using them anyway. There is a front, and then if you look, they're the same, so they're not side specific. Like some of the older styles were side specific, but all you need to do is make sure the front faces the front, so there's not a up or down really per se. And you can see what I'm talking about when I get them down. There's a little bit of a ledge between the two, but it seems as though people have had really good luck with these, and like I said, that's why I'm going with them. And everything seems to line up great. Some people coat these with some silicone spray. I just don't. We're not going to run that much boost through this car down the road, if we even turbo it, which, like I said, that's the initial plan, and that's quite a ways down the road. But we're not going to get that crazy because this bottom end obviously won't hold that much. But this is now in place. I snapped it over the guides, and we're ready to grab the head and put it into place. So I've blown off the head, and there's really no big difference between the two. One has a spot where your coolant temp sensor goes. Obviously this was the one that was on the other side, but it doesn't really matter because they are threaded for both. So we're going to set them into place. So we're setting them on those dowels. And it is on there. So I'm going to grab a couple bolts, and then we'll talk about what option I decided to go with. Obviously I'm not using head studs. I'm using bolts. Now I'm just going to thread a couple of these bolts in just to keep the head into place. Then we'll talk about the bolts that I'm using. Actually, I guess I could talk about them while I'm threading this in. The bolts I decided to go with, guys, are actually from Earl's. And the reason I chose to go with these, and I'm going to have to unthread these, obviously, but the reason I chose to go with these is because, for one, the ARP ones, nobody had them in stock. And so I was going to have to wait quite a while to get them. And the other reason is these are reusable as well, and they're a little bit cheaper. So, you know, that's good. It's always nice to have something that's cheaper and reusable. It's actually made out of the same material, same tensile strength as ARP fastener. But let me get all these out, and you're going to notice that a couple of them are shorter. Those are going to go up top here, and a couple of them are longer. I think I'm right in saying, yeah, the shorter ones go up top, I believe, and the longer ones go on the bottom. But you're going to have 4 total that are shorter than the others. And obviously there's some washers and stuff too. I got to get this open, but we'll get those out and I'll show you kind of what we're looking at. So as you can see, you have all of your head bolts. You have the shorter ones for the outer ones. You have the very short and smaller ones. Those are obviously the ones that go along the top here. And the last thing you have is the washers. And we will talk about how we're going to assemble these. They also come with assembly lube, and obviously you're going to need some of that. One thing that's really awesome that I just noticed was that I only got 4 of the smaller ones, and as you can see it takes 5. So obviously I'm going to have to be calling them and getting obviously 2 more, which sucks because that means I'm not going to be able to put both heads on at the same time. I'm going to be able to do one side but not the other. But besides that, you do have the washers. Now the smaller washers don't really matter. They don't, well, I guess they have a little bit of a chamfered into them. You can see that on this side, if it'll focus, that side goes towards the bolt head. And so we need to put that into place. And obviously we're going to be putting some assembly lube on that, and I'll show you that in just one second. But that washer, like I said, that beveled piece right there, that's going to go towards the bolt head. So there's several places that you're going to put the anti-seize or assembly lube, I guess you would call it. So you're going to put it on the threads, okay? You're going to put it on the bolt head, obviously the section that bolts down, and you're going to put it on the washer. So this is not a clean job. You're going to put it on both sides of the washer. So obviously this is going to get really, really messy, but in order to get the proper torque reading, you need to make sure that you're doing this, and then obviously you need to make sure that you're putting the washer in the correct position. So we're going to go ahead and start to thread these in. Now I'm not even going to hit the deck surface. I'm just going to gradually screw each one of them in. Obviously I'm going to be taking out the ones that I put in to hold it into place, and doing the same thing to each one of them. But this is going to be a long process and a messy process because, like I said, it's not super clean here. Anytime you're using anti-seize or any kind of assembly lube, it's always a mess. But we've got, well, like I said, we can only do one side right now. So I guess we only have half as many to do, right? Well guys, at this point, let me grab my light. We've got all of the bolts ran down on the head. Now there is a sequence, and you're just going to follow the factory GM sequence, which I'll try to list a link down below of the sequence. But you start in the middle with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know. I'll post it in the link down below. I was looking at it on a sheet while I was, or on my phone while I was doing this, because I don't have it memorized. I just know you start in the middle and work your way out. But we are going to go ahead and put the top ones in. Same thing. There is a chamfered piece on the actual. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of glare here. Let's see if I can hold my light. Same thing on the smaller ones. You can see. There's a chamfered end there, and that end goes towards the bolt head. We're going to go ahead and put those in, and then we'll start the torque sequence, which it says on the instructions. Now, my instructions didn't come with torque specs for these top bolts, but I found out from the manufacturer there are 25 foot-pounds on the top, and you're going to go through the same sequence, but it's 30 the first pass, then 50, then 75. And the top ones all along the top get 25. So we are going to start torquing those down in the sequence like GM would have done it. And well, then we'll be able to move to the other side. Alright guys, so like I stated before I put these in, I went ahead and snugged those up, just hand tight. We're going to start the torque sequence, and we are going to go 30 the first pass. We're going to follow that guide that I'm going to list a link to below as far as the sequence. Then we're going to do 25, and then we're going to go to 50 and 75. And I will probably retorque these at 25 each time just to go through the sequence like normal. But it does say that you can do this and then these last. But that's just, I don't know. I'm picky, I guess. And even though we're going to go 30, 25, 50, and then 75, I feel like I'm going to go across these again with 25 each time. So let's get started on that, and then we'll go to the other side and start prepping it to put the other head on. Well, we got the first pass complete with 30 and 25. Now we're going to go back and do that same sequence with 50, and I'm going to retorque those to 25. It kind of sucks because you have to adjust your torque wrench between, but not a huge deal. And then, like I said, followed by the last step at 75, 25. Well, as you can see, I did get another turn or two on these top ones, even though they've already been torqued to 25. So as the head pulls down, you do need to retorque those. So glad I did that. But we are down to the last step, guys, and that is 75 foot-pounds. And the motor's, as you can see, it's starting to walk around a little bit. So make sure that you kind of keep it planted with your foot. I've got it blocked down at the bottom so it's not running into the car. I know it looks like it is. I need a little more room in here, but it's dark outside and it was raining, so I didn't want to pull the car out. So 75 foot-pounds and then another pass of 25, and we will be finished on this side. Alright guys, well, we have one side completely finished. Now we're ready to swap to the other side. Now the downside, like I said, is they shorted me two of the smaller bolts. So what I'm going to do is you guys really won't notice it because it's all in one video, but I'm going to go ahead and snug this head down just by hand. Well guys, as you can see, a couple things. I had to move the motor over to this side. The Corvette's over here now. But I did get those two last bolts. Like I said, they shorted the kit when I bought these Earl's head bolts. So I got a hold of them. They sent me two out. It's been a couple weeks, which sucks. I've been waiting on that. But the head is all torqued down now. So now we're going to move on to setting the lifter preload. Now, the downside on these LS motors is the only way to set the preload on the lifter is your pushrod link. So I went ahead and bought 7.4 inch pushrods. Now, it's probably a little bit long for my application, and I may have to end up ordering some other ones, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the rockers set into place, and I got this adjustable pushrod from Comp Cams, and I'll list this down in the description below. But the reason I'm going to put the rockers all in place and I'm just going to hand snug them down is just because when I start to move this, I don't want this to rock forward and give me an inaccurate reading. So I want to have it nice and tight. I'm actually going to start here on the driver's side. We're going to take these two off, but the first step is I'm going to go ahead and just hand tighten them all in. Probably not even going to put a push rod in. I can always take them back out and do that. But our first step is to get those in place. Okay, so we have all the rockers into place, and like I said, they're just setting on there just so this doesn't move around the rocker stand. But what we're going to do is I've got two push rods in, and these are the ones that I ordered, and we're going to rotate the motor until the exhaust valve just starts to open. And once it starts to open, we know that the intake valve is where it needs to be. Okay, it's starting to open now. So I'm going to set one of these rockers into place, and we're going to tighten it down until there is zero lash. And so essentially what that means is if you can get your fingers in there to move the push rod would not be able to be moved. And this is a time-consuming process, so. All right, now we have zero lash. Push rod, I can't move it with my fingers. So now what we need to do is we're going to see how many times around it takes to get to 22 foot-pounds. So if it takes more than 2 turns, we know that we need a longer push rod. If it takes less than half a turn, we know that we need a shorter push rod. So I've got my torque wrench, and we're going to set it to 22 foot-pounds because that is the factory spec for the GM LS push rods, or I mean the rockers. So there's 1/4 turn. There's a half. There's 3/4. There's 1, 1 1/4, 1 1/2. So we are good. These 7.4 millimeter push rods, I was kind of worried because I had to shave the heads down just a little bit. Now, so worst case scenario, we're going to check this one as well, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But let's say that it took more than 2 turns. That is when we would need that adjustable push rod, because otherwise you would be just guessing. Now, the adjustable push rod has different measurements. There's little markings on the side. And so it's adjustable, I think, from 6.8 all the way up to 7.5 or 7.6. And each one of these single turns represents a 1/4 inch. So we're not going to have to use that. It's a good thing to have, and I did buy that. It's only I think it's like $20, so it's a pretty cheap alternative. And if these weren't the right size, or it took a little more to torque them down than what it did, we would know that we need to find the size. And instead of just guessing, ordering push rods and doing this method, just counting the turns, that would be a little bit easier of a process. That way we could get to zero lash, and then we could measure basically 70 thousandths is like what GM likes. It's between 50 and 100 thousandths is what they like their preload set at. So there's a ton of other videos out there, guys, talking about preload. If this is not a good representation, or you don't like this method, K-Tech has one, CompCams has one. They also talk about you cannot tighten the lifter down with the adjustable push rod. It just doesn't have enough in it to sustain that. You're really just checking for zero lash and then measuring from there. So we are good here. We are going to rotate the engine around until this starts to close. And it's just starting to close. So now we can do the same method on the exhaust side. So once we have, let me move my camera over a little closer. Once we have a this one set and we're good here, we need to turn the motor around until this is on base circle, essentially. So what we're doing is we're waiting for the intake valve to just starting, or it's just starting to close. So there, now we need to put our exhaust side in, and we're essentially counting the turns again. So I'm pretty sure this is going to work. Like I said, guys, this is not, I'm not an engine builder by any means, but from the research that I've done, I've never measured push rods. I've always just bought whatever the manufacturer suggested. And when I talked to Texas Speed with this cam and this headwork, they told me it might be a little on the long side to measure it, and so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But we're going to run this down until there's no lash, and then we will tighten it down just like we did the other one to 22 foot-pounds. And if it takes more than 2 turns, obviously we need a different push rod. If it takes less, same thing. So okay. We're going to count the turns again. Still set on 22. Oh. So there's half, or a quarter. There's a half. There's 3/4. So we are good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the push rods in. I always put a little bit of Loctite on the rocker arm bolts, and I use blue Loctite. That's up to you guys. You don't have to do that. I'm not even sure that GM calls for that. That's just something I've always done just to make sure they don't back out. But we got lucky. The 7.25 or the 7.4 inch push rods are what we are using. You also notice that I had these soaking in oil, so that's why it's so messy right now. But just wanted to kind of lube them up. The other thing I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the end of each push rod on both ends. Also, just something that I like to do. You don't have to do that, but let's button these all up, and we'll move on to the next step. So once I have all the push rods in, I've got assembly lube on both sides, and I'll list that, of course, in the descriptions down below. But I'm going to use that same method to tighten these up. That way you're, it's just really the best method. That way you can see if you had to use any spacers on any of the springs, you may have to have a different push rod. I've seen people have to put a different push rod here than here. But I'm pretty sure we're square. I don't think we're going to have to do that, but I am going to use that same method. So I'm going to tighten the intake when the exhaust starts to open, and then just the opposite when this starts to close, I'll tighten this one. Well, we are all finished on this side. Now we just got to do the other side, and I won't make you guys watch that. But like I said, I feel like the better method is to spin this around and do that same method while you're tightening all these. And it did come out to spec, so we are good. Now we need to go to the other side and finish it up. And I'm not really sure what we'll do next. We may have a couple things to put on the block, but we're getting really close to putting this thing back in the car. Well, now everything is completely torqued down. I went through it twice just to make sure. And I spun those around until the exhaust valve opened. Then I tightened down the intake. And when the intake started to close, I tightened down the exhaust. Went through that process. I've never done that before. I've always just torqued them down to 22 foot-pounds. And to be quite honest with you, this is probably the way I should have been doing it. But I never had any issues. The other couple things I want to do before we obviously drop this motor in, and we're not going to be doing that today, but there's a bracket that holds the transmission lines here. Then I'm going to go, or actually right there, I'm going to go ahead and put in the oil level sensor. I'm going to put that in as well. And then on the back side of the head, there's a plug. Depending on which side you put this on, there's a plug here. And then on the other side, there is there's a plug in it right now, but that's going to be the coolant temp sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and get those into place. And I'll probably go ahead and put the coolant bypass in the way. There's a couple caps that go back on the back side. Now, this is kind of one of those things that down the road I may end up making a steam vent. The LS1 style steam vent actually ran through the middle and up to the front, and a lot of people like to run those. The problem is, without trimming the bottom side of the LS6 intake, they do not fit. So I'm just going to put this back to the stock location. People say that you get some hot spots in 7 and 8 back here if you don't do that, but for what we're doing, it's not going to be an issue. So let's go grab those parts and get those into place. Now on these bolts that go here to cap off the head, I've always used some Teflon tape before I run them down on both sides. So the sensor on the other side and this one on the passenger side. Both this plug and the plug on the other side get torqued to 15 foot-pounds, which isn't very much. So as I said, the coolant crossover, which these aren't obviously a crossover, but the plugs for the backside, I'm going to go ahead and put those on. And down the road, I might switch over to like a steam vent setup. These do have a specific, obviously one side's threaded, the other side has a plug on it. These are gaskets, and make sure that they look good. Mine look really good. So not going to have to replace those, but that is a replaceable part. If need be, there is a gasket there. And obviously if you have a leak, that would be the first place I'd check. And then we're going to put the one up front. But like I said, down the road I may end up switching to a steam port setup, or even trimming the bottom side of the intake. But for now, for the power level that we're going to be at, it's just not necessary. Now once you get these into place, you need to torque them down to 106 inch-pounds. Make sure you don't go any further past that. This is really small bolts, 10 millimeters. So 106 inch-pounds. Well, for the most part, the block itself has everything bolted to it that I need bolted to it before I get it in the car. Now, just to keep dust and debris out of it, I'm going to go ahead and put my valve covers on. Now they're kind of dusty right now, but I did paint these the same color as under the hood. I will be reusing GM gaskets, which I did purchase, and I will list that in the description below as well. That is the part number. I don't know if you guys can see that. But we're going to stick these in place and get these at least snug down. I may end up taking these off because I'm afraid I'm going to scratch them when I put the motor in. Maybe not. Just depends. I am just going to snug them down. I'm not going to torque them yet. Now one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this plug into place, because we will not be using the factory PCV, and we will talk about that once the motor's in the car. We are moving to an LS6 valley cover, and like I said, we'll talk about that more when we get in the car, but I can't put that on yet because we have to put the motor plate on in order to get it in the car. So I think I am going to go ahead and torque these down, and then I think we will be finished up for today. So like I said, the very last thing we're going to do is I am going to go ahead and torque these. They get torqued to 106 inch-pounds, and I'm going to kind of work my way from the middle out. I mean, there's only 4 of them, but that's really the best method of doing it. But once we finish that up, like I said, I think we'll be finished for today. Well guys, like I said, I think we are finished for today. We got a lot accomplished. We got the heads bolted down. We got the rocker arms in place. We were able to test fit the push rods to make sure they were the correct size. I don't recommend buying push rods beforehand unless you talk to like Texas Speed. Most of these components came from them. So if you talk to them, they will be able to put you in the right direction as far as how much they're taking off the heads when they deck them, or how much compression you're going to be running. How much is milled off the heads basically determines what size push rod you're going to need. If you give them that info, they should be able to tell you just based off of that. But we were lucky with the 7.4s, did work. I don't recommend just throwing 7.4s that's in it. You know, a lot of people do that. I've done that in the past, never had any issues, but I don't recommend that. You just could risk losing a lifter down the road if it is too long, or a lot of engine chatter if it's too short. So hopefully you guys are liking this video. Hopefully you like this content. We are going to be probably doing one more video on cleaning underneath the car. I've got some stuff I want to clean up under there and a few more parts to install before we get the engine in. So the next video will probably be on that. But we are getting to the point where it's almost time. It's almost time to get this engine in place, and well, I'm getting excited because I haven't driven this car in so long and I'm ready to get it going. We also, of course, have thrown the Camaro into the mix and the truck, and we've got all kinds of content, guys. So if you're not subscribed, please go down there and hit that subscribe button. Make sure you ring that bell icon. That way you're notified every time we drop a new video. And you never know what it could be. It could be another car. Who knows? I might be purchasing another car. Who knows with me, you know? So if you like it, though, smash that thumbs up button, guys, and stay tuned to see this thing go back in the car.